Money makes the world go round, or so the saying goes. But the lack of money, in this instance, foreign exchange, could be grounding the aviation sector of the largest economy in Africa. Could an innovative proposal be the way to get Nigeria flying high again? And Nigerians may need to brace for a nationwide blackout as electricity workers say they are going on strike today. What are the issues and how will this impact the economy? Those are some of the stories you'll be getting into today on Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Up first is African Business Headlines. Tanzania's power utility firm TANESCO has entered into a joint venture with a UAE-based company to generate a further 2,000 megawatts of electricity using renewable sources by 2024. This will add the expected 2,115 megawatts from the ongoing $2.9 billion Julius Nyerere hydropower project in southern Tanzania. Under the agreement, 5,600 megawatts of solar and onshore wind capacity will be developed initially, as the remaining is uploaded in subsequent phases. Kenya has been spared an aviation crisis after the Kenya Airports Authority appealed a decision by a labor court for workers to go on strike. A majority of members of the Aviation Workers Union delayed the call to down their tools to protest reduced pay increases, dealing a major blow to the union's demand for better salaries from the Kenya Airports Authority. Nigeria's Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council has unveiled its plans to kickstart a $750 million World Bank-funded program in January next year. Nigeria's Vice President Yemi Osinbajo said that the kind of business environments Nigeria required for significant economic growth could only be achieved through hard work at the sub-national level. And finally, the Bank of Uganda is contemplating further tightening its monetary policy to ensure inflation reverts to its medium-term target of 5%. Inflation pressure will continue to rise in the near term, Deputy Governor Michael Atinga-Ego has said, adding that the central bank rates was increased by 50 basis points to 9% to address the inflationary pressure. Headline inflation rose to 7.9% in July from 6.8% in June. And those are a few business headlines to get things started right here on Business Edge. We'll be taking a timeout, but when we come back, could an aviation bank get Nigeria's airways flying again? Stay with us. Nigeria's aviation industry should be in recovery from the difficulties brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Domestic traffic was up 43% in 2021 after the lows seen during the pandemic in 2020. 13 million people arrived and departed from local trips around the country. Nigeria's aviation industry should be looking good, but it's not. Instead, it finds itself in a rather precarious position. Fuel prices have nearly tripled, rising from 200 naira a litre to 780 naira a litre, an increase of 290% in just 5 months. The foreign exchange airlines need to pay for the replacement of parts, maintenance, and to conduct other transactions is scarce. The oldest operating domestic Nigerian airline, Aero Contractors, has temporarily suspended its business operations, citing the tough operating environment. Some believe that these challenges could be solved with the formation of an aviation bank. My guest today is Professor Anthony Kila, who is a Jean Monnet Professor of Strategy and Development. He's also the Center Director at CIPAS, the Center for International Advanced and Professional Studies. Professor Kila, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So before we get into what could be the saving salvo for Nigeria's aviation industry, let's look at where it is right now. I did mention a number of challenges the industry has in my introduction, but beyond that, those challenges didn't start with the pandemic, and they didn't start with the Forex issues that the aviation industry is currently facing now. So what exactly has been the challenges that the industry has been facing, let's say over the past 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think you're very right. The situation we have now is just an exacerbation of an existing trend. The problem we've had over the year, close to a decade, as you've mentioned, are linked to inability to finance the aviation industry. A lot of emphasis has been laid on security and safety in aviation, and it must be said that indeed some progress has been made in terms of safety and security in aviation in Nigeria. That must be said. But the other major side of aviation is finance, which the Nigerian system is not looking at well. Aviation is a very, very expensive sector. It's a very finance-consuming industry, and it does not only consume a lot; it consumes forex. So, for us to grow past where we are and become a sustainable industry, it needs a lot of money. So far, we've been trying to address the financial deficit by having aviation testing banned and perhaps by having some concessions. I think, from results that we've seen, that has not worked so far. So it is time to take a radical shift and rethink and respect the aviation sector as a whole. And one of the things that can be done is to have an ad hoc, a bespoke financial instrument and institution for aviation industry.
Okay, so Professor Kila, before we get deeper into the potential of an aviation back, let's fast forward to after the pandemic. Air traffic is struggling to recover, and there were also reports of a bailout for the aviation industry. But at the end of the day, there were a lot of accusations and counter-accusations on the front pages of national newspapers. So was there really a bailout that helped the industry sort of jump through, or rather swim through, the issues that the pandemic brought about and get out to the other side? Or at the end of the day, did that bailout really not manifest for the industry?
Well, it didn't manifest in terms of results. You see, these things is not a matter of faith, opinion, or view. It's either you have results or you do not get results. The idea was to keep the industries afloat because they were not flying, they were not operating for a very long period of time during the pandemic. So they've come back to operate, but the scenario, the context they've met seems to be worse than before they went away of the pandemic. What is the scenario they've met? They've met due to a lot of factors, but we have the national factor as well. There's a lot of factors like the high cost in fuel aviation, the high cost in maintenance that has happened. It has become difficult for them to compete and to operate because costs are getting higher, while they could not readily increase the fare. To make it worse, because the Nigerian economy is having a strain on its currency, because there is pressure on naira, and the dollar is scarce, aviation industry is suffering from a double jeopardy. One, they cannot increase their cost, and two, they do not have enough access to the amount of forex they need to pay for aviation and to pay for equipment that they're using. So that is the crux of the problem. So the results that they're giving, which I was the naira, is even overtaken now. It did not solve the problem because the situation they met became worse than what they left there before the pandemic.
So I want us to dwell a little bit on this Forex issue. You talked about it in terms of how it's affecting the airlines, and even it's affecting passengers. So we're seeing less flights in certain routes, attempts to increase the price just a bit, but passengers are responding by simply not taking these trips now. You're finding reports of flights going almost half empty, if not more, for local trips. So when we look at this Forex issue, really, how deeply has it affected the operations of the aviation industry?
Oh, well, it's affected very deeply. we're talking economics or we're talking cost and revenue. The joy of economics is that you can apply very, home-based situations, very complex situations. It's just like with your own cars or your at home. You see, if you cannot afford to buy petrol to fuel your car, you know that's big trouble. And that is what the aviation industry is facing. Because the cost went up phenomenally and access to buy has also grown, it became almost impossible for them to sustain it. And they don't even have I repeat, the forex to buy these things because they have to buy it in forex and outside Nigeria. So finance, and you can see everything we're talking about, it comes around cost and revenue.
All right. So before we get straight to the aviation bank, there are aviation desks that are actually found with the government and also some banks as well as a way to sort out financing for the sector. Why has having aviation desks with banks not been enough to address the issues of the industry?
Well, because those desks have the way they've been created, they're just there to service airlines. So, they're like account managers where if you have an airline, you go to your bank and they say, meet our aviation account manager. It's a good thing, but it's not enough. You see, in other circumstances, it might just be enough. I mean, you don't have a bank for shoemakers or a bank for dentists, really. You don't need it because their needs are minimal and their needs are general. To your question, why are they not enough? They're not enough because aviation is a very peculiar sector that requires, in a case like Nigeria, bespoke solutions. It requires bespoke solutions because it requires high amount of finance, unlike most other sectors, and also because it requires a peculiar kind of finance, which is the forex. The aviation desk cannot handle that itself. You need an institution that can interface with government to get some kind of bespoke legislation, procedures, and processes for them. You need an institution that can attract and accumulate and coordinate investments around aviation. You need to raise something to the tune of $5 billion just for aviation to start with, and then on and on like that. So debt cannot do that. You need an institution, an adopted institution that can make that radical change. Because it is not just raising money, it is also being able to coordinate with forex to do it. So you need an institution that is mandated to perhaps deal with the forex that Nigeria ends abroad. That is majorly oil and gas. That is mandated to be able to deal with that. You need a special concession from the CBN and the Ministry of Finance. And the debt cannot do that.
Sure, you could hear me. But I believe that what you're describing as the ad hoc and the bespoke solution is where your proposal of an aviation bank actually comes in. And you've talked a bit about what it should be able to do, to be able to propose legislation, to be able to raise around $5 billion for Nigeria's aviation industry. So why do you think an aviation bank is the next step for Nigeria's aviation industry? Are things so bad, or maybe not so bad, but are things at the point where the NCAA and the current setup is simply not enough to take the industry to the next place where it needs to go? So sort of take us a little bit further into how this aviation bank would work.
Well, it's not an opinion that they're not able to deal with it. Because it's just a matter of fact, and it's not a condemnation or a praise of the present system. Facts are airlines are closing, costs are increasing, we're not making most use of what we can do. Moving forward, what is required is a deliberate
Professor Kila.
And we're going to try to channel investment from even other sources. Yes.
Go ahead, I can hear you. You froze for a moment there, so continue.
Sorry about that. what I'm saying is we need a specific deliberate attempt, deliberate instrument that is going to say we're here to make sure aviation works. We're going to we're going to raise enough funds for aviation, and we're going to deliberately manage those funds between all the stakeholders to make sure aviation works. And we're going to invite, attract other sectors, other investors, other innovators around aviation so that our challenges can become opportunities. Part of the challenges we have, for example, is refining of the aviation fuel. Experts will tell you that aviation fuel, expensive as it is just a sort of glorified kerosene. But you say that only if you can do it. Now, we cannot do it. So perhaps if we have a bank that is really geared towards improving the aviation sector, they might be able to fund such endeavors through partnerships and various kind of collaboration. Of course, to do all these things we're talking about, we need to change the mindset. At the moment, there's a general misconception by users and even policymakers, I'm afraid to admit, that aviation is something for the elite, for the few privileged people. But you see, that conception is very wrong and dangerous because in a country like Nigeria, given our size and structure, aviation is actually an essential infrastructure for the country. The size, because the country is very big, and because the times in which we live in today, doing business between Lagos and Sokoto, between Enugu and Maiduguri should be a very common thing. Actually, you do business with the whole of the world. And the way the world is going, nobody sleeps. You should be able to transact and travel 4 hours a day. To that extent, if you understand that, you will understand that more people should be traveling, not less. And more people traveling means more jobs, more wealth creation, more trade. So we need to change the mindset that aviation is a peculiar sector for little. We should be telling ourselves not enough people are traveling, not enough people are using our airports. Aviation is not employing more people. Once we have that mindset, we will then see that the challenges we have in aviation could be turned to opportunities for the whole system. Because by solving those problems, we shall be creating more jobs and more wealth and opportunities and collaborations between sectors.
All right, so Professor Kila, hold on. We're going to take a break. When we come back, it's not just local airlines that are suffering. We know that 2 local airlines have suspended operations. One was forced and the other took the decision. But even foreign airlines have issues with Nigeria's aviation industry. We'll get into that. And then we'll also get into what happens next. What do we do next? And especially, is it time again for Nigeria to have a national carrier? So there are still more points on this conversation about Nigeria's aviation industry. An aviation bank, could that be the way to get Nigeria's airlines back in the skies? But beyond that, what other issues must the industry face? Stick around. Data from the International Air Transport Association says that foreign airlines have more than $450 million trapped in Nigeria because of the CBN's restriction due to the forex scarcity. And some are projecting that the debt owed to over 27 airlines could hit $1 billion by December if the government doesn't intervene. Professor Anthony Kila, policy analyst and advisor, is here as we look at Nigeria's aviation industry. Now, Professor Kila, on the issue of foreign airlines not being able to repatriate their funds, what do you think the impact is so far on the industry, and how must we address this?
Well, let us start with what the problem is. The problem the international airlines are having is that they cannot repatriate their money, because they sell in naira and they need to send back their money in dollars. So that is a huge problem there. I think the government needs to step in. They need to put in some agreement that will allow them to repatriate their money and the way to do it is the central bank thing. The central bank needs to prioritize what can be done in dollars. Unfortunately for Nigeria, too much is being done in dollars. So there is a general problem of pressure most of our earnings is going into forex. So that's the problem. But if we agree that the aviation is a peculiar sector, then we have to prioritize it so that the skies can stay. And that will mean, for example, as an instrument that will exchange what we earn in dollars from sectors like oil and gas, which is our main source of revenue, but also from the aviation itself, so that what is earned outside Nigeria regarding aviation would stay in dollars, and what we get from other sectors like the crude oil, a huge part of it will go into aviation because it is one sector that requires spending to be done in dollars.
So let me also bring you to one of your other proposals now. So we've looked at the aviation bank that you say its time has come, but you also were speaking recently at the League of Airports and Aviation Correspondents Conference, and you said that the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, which is the regulator in the space, should move towards becoming a clearinghouse for the industry. So from aviation regulator to a clearinghouse. So sort of explain this. Let's clarify what exactly you mean.
Well, yes, it's part of strategies for rethinking the aviation industry. So at the moment, the situation we have is less airlines flying, more delays, and angry passengers. So here's one thing the regulator can actually do. They can get the airlines still flying. They can get the airlines together, at least within Nigeria, and create a situation whereby once you get to the airport, if the airline you book is not flying, you can then fly with the airline that is willing and able to fly at that moment. In a way, it would be like you having your debit or credit card in your hand, and you walk on the street, and you look for the nearest automated teller machine, the ATM, and you withdraw money from it, regardless of which bank is managing it. That is doable in the banking industry because there is a clearinghouse that manages the funds for all the banks. And that can also be done in the aviation industry as well. So the regulator, the Civil Aviation Authority in Nigeria, the NCTA, can be the guarantor for all the airlines to know that what matters to them, the government, to the regulator, is for passengers to fly. So once you get to the airport, you fly, and your money will then be remitted to the person that actually carries you, and the difference is paid for. So that is a possible thing. And by the way, it is not only good.
Professor Kila.
Passengers stranded at the airport, and some airlines are traveling with unfilled vessels, with half-empty aircraft. So it's the way. Yes.
Go ahead.
I can hear you.
There was a technical glitch there, so go ahead.
Oh, that was great. Yeah. Sorry about that. It's a win-win situation for everybody because at the moment, what we have is a situation wherein you have stranded passengers at the airport, angry, sometimes violent. Then you have some because their flights are delayed. So you have some airlines that are flying and their aircraft are not full. So to that extent, what will happen is that all the aircraft will be full because they'll be carrying all the stranded passengers. The passengers will be happy, and indeed, the clearinghouse or the bank of the airline that is trying to book can even make some extra buck on it because just as it happens sometimes when you use another bank, the machine of another bank to withdraw money, it is possible for you also, you get charged sometimes. So the same way, you can deal with that as well.
Okay, so Professor Kila, before I let you go, some would say that the industry right now could literally be on the brink of crisis. Fuel prices tripled in the space of 5 months. Foreign exchange difficult to get at the advertised rates by the Nigerian CBN. And beyond your proposal for aviation back, we're also hearing that the country is still holding tight to its plans to launch a flagship airline back to a nationalized airline or a national airline being Nigeria Air. When you look at that and you look at the state of the industry right now, what do you think can be done to ensure that this industry doesn't go under. We don't have more local airlines shutting operations, stranding more passengers. But at the end of the day, we see some growth and progress with Nigeria's aviation industry.
Well, I am convinced that we need more airlines, not less. I am not convinced that government-owned airlines is the solution, as the old Nigerian way to thought of. My view is that the government should facilitate private entrepreneurs to develop more airlines. I also believe that the airlines we have at the moment are not enough and are not strong enough. I argue that we should sort of consolidate airlines, have more definitely, but raise the base for them so that they can be really run. It's a successful aviation sector with 2 or 3 airlines. You need more. You need about a fleet of 10, 15, 20 minimum to start with. So that way you can have economies of scale and you can manage your flight and you can manage the losses that you might acquire. So when the Nigerian government comes to fore with the new airline and they start with 3 aircraft, my feeling is that an elephant has given birth to a mouse.
An elephant has given birth to a mouse. I think we'll leave the conversation at that point. It's one definitely that will continue, especially with fears of the foreign debt, the foreign airlines that have been unable to repatriate their money, that money possibly reaching $1 billion by December. But of course, no one wants to see more airlines close and jobs being lost. So it's a conversation that will continue. Professor Anthony Kila, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
And an aviation bank may, or rather, I beg your pardon, that's right, an aviation bank may seem far-fetched to many, but it could just be the thing that Nigeria's aviation industry needs to get back flying in the skies. But we'll see how that plays out. There are many proposals to save Nigeria's aviation industry, but which one will finally go through, especially as Nigeria Air could be back in the skies before you know it. You're watching Business Edge. We're going to be getting into the international business news in just a moment.